The polished wood of the conference table feels cold beneath my fingertips, a stark contrast to the sudden fever in my veins. Across from me, his face is a mask I thought I knew, every line etched by years I spent believing were ours, together. But the mask is new now, tighter, thinner. It doesn't hold the warmth, the shared history, the quiet promises whispered over late-night strategy sessions that bled into early mornings. It holds nothing, an emptiness where I saw a future. His words are precise, clipped. Corporate language used as a blunt weapon. Restructuring, he says. Optimizing resources, my job title. The one I built from the ground up, the one stitched into the fabric of my identity for over a decade, hangs in the air like a death sentence for a part of myself. He talks about redundancy, about necessary changes for the company's future. Our company's future, I used to think. The future he is now crafting without me, actively dismantling the past we built. My breath hitches. It's not the words themselves, but the utter lack of feeling behind them. No regret, no apology, not even a flicker of the man who held my hand during tough pitches, who celebrated our wins with genuine joy, who understood my professional dreams because they mirrored his own. That man is gone, replaced by this stranger in a familiar suit, delivering the final blow with the detached cruelty of an executioner fulfilling a regrettable but necessary duty. Except there's nothing regrettable in his eyes. Only finality. And beneath that, maybe, just maybe, a hint of something else. Something that makes my stomach clench tighter than the grief.
Something like
triumph? Relief? A chilling eagerness for what comes next. The silence stretches, thick with unspoken accusations and the ghosts of shared ambition. My office, just beyond these polished doors, still contains traces of my life. Framed photos of us on hiking trips, awards we won together. The ergonomic chair he insisted I get because I worked such long hours. It's all a stage set for a play that just ended, and I wasn't given the final script. I feel the blood drain from my face, leaving a cold, numb mask of my own. The air is suddenly too thin to breathe. This isn't just a job firing. This is an excommunication. From my career, from my marriage, from the life I woke up to this morning. Let me know where you're watching from and what time it is. And if you haven't already, please subscribe. It helps me more than you know. Before this moment, before the cold words and the stranger's face, life felt full. Not perfect, because whose is? But full. My name is Clara. I was, until moments ago, the head of strategy at Sterling Corp., a company I'd poured 15 years of my life into. 15 years, side by side with David. My husband, David. We met in our late 20s, both ambitious, both grinding away in entry-level positions at Sterling. The company was smaller then, hungrier. We were, too. We bonded over shared frustrations with bureaucracy, late nights fueled by lukewarm coffee and big ideas. There was a spark, undeniable and exhilarating. It wasn't just attraction. It was a recognition of a kindred spirit, someone who spoke the same language of spreadsheets and potential, who saw the same future we could build, professionally and personally. We married 3 years later. By then, we weren't entry-level anymore. We were rising steadily together. David gravitated towards operations and finance, a knack for the mechanics of how things worked, how money flowed. I was drawn to the bigger picture, the market trends, the strategic vision. Where were we going, and how would we get there? We were a perfect professional pair. His grounded practicality balanced my sometimes soaring vision. My ability to see around corners complemented his focus on the path directly ahead. At home, it was much the same. He handled the bills, the car maintenance, the practicalities. I thought about travel, planned future goals, kept the social calendar humming. We built a comfortable life. A beautiful apartment downtown, weekends spent hiking or trying new restaurants, quiet evenings reading side by side. Our conversations often drifted back to work, not out of obligation, but genuine interest. We were partners in every sense of the word. Our careers weren't separate paths. They were intertwined, like two threads strengthening the same rope. We celebrated each other's promotions as shared victories, commiserated over setbacks, brainstormed solutions over dinner. Sterling Corp grew with us. We were part of its success story, and it was part of ours. My role as head of strategy was demanding, all-consuming sometimes, but I loved it. I loved dissecting market data, forecasting trends, identifying opportunities no one else saw. I loved crafting the roadmap for the future, presenting it to the board, seeing it implemented, watching it yield results. David, as VP of Operations, was integral to executing those strategies, turning plans into tangible results. Our professional synergy was renowned within the company. People saw us as a power couple, unstoppable, built for this world. And I believed them. I believed us. There were whispers, of course. In any corporate environment, especially one where a married couple holds significant power, there are always whispers. About nepotism, about unfair advantage. We dismissed them. We knew the work we put in, the hours, the sacrifices, the results we delivered. Our track record spoke for itself. We weren't handed anything. We earned it, together. The life we had, the respect we commanded, the future that seemed so secure, it was all built on that foundation of shared effort, mutual respect, and unwavering trust. Especially trust. I trusted David implicitly. With my heart, with my life, with my career. Looking back, maybe I was naive. Maybe I was so focused on the horizon, I didn't see the cracks forming at my feet. The subtle shifts, the late nights that weren't spent strategizing, the phone calls that ended abruptly when I entered the room. I rationalized them away. Stress. Pressure at work. Normal ebb and flow of a long marriage. I was too busy living the life we built to question the foundation. The life that felt so solid, so real, just moments before it was swept out from under me by the very man I built it with. The first crack wasn't the meeting. It was the text message. A generic notification popped up on David's work phone, which he'd left on the kitchen counter. A snippet visible on the lock screen. Can't wait for Shanghai. Room with a view, just like you like. Winking face followed by a heart emoji. It was from a name I vaguely recognized. Jessica. One of the new hires in marketing, brought in maybe 6 months ago. Young, bright, eager. I'd met her a couple of times in passing. Nothing remarkable. My blood went cold. Shanghai? David was going to Shanghai for a conference next week. Alone, he'd said. Company trip. Room with a view, just like you like? He always booked rooms with city views when he traveled. He knew I loved them. The heart emoji, that wasn't how colleagues texted about business trips. A cold dread, heavy and nauseating, settled in my gut. My hands were shaking as I picked up his phone. It was unlocked. A cascade of messages opened. The world tilted on its axis. Pages and pages of texts. Not just about Shanghai. About accidental meetings in the office parking garage. About late nights, working, that ended up at her apartment. About her career ambitions and how he could help her. About me. Casual, dismissive mentions. The old ball and chain, the one who doesn't understand anymore, my name used as a punchline, a barrier to their burgeoning connection. The words burned into my retinas, acid eating away at 15 years of shared history, dissolving the trust one had placed my entire being in. The betrayal was a physical blow, a punch to the gut that left me breathless and doubled over at the kitchen counter. The text about Shanghai wasn't just confirmation of an affair, it was the horrifying realization that he was planning a future trip with her, a trip he'd lied to me about. It wasn't a momentary lapse, it was a sustained deception, woven into the fabric of our daily lives. I don't remember picking up my phone. I don't remember dialing his office line. My fingers moved automatically. He answered, his voice calm, professional. The usual sound of him at work. It grated on my raw nerves. David, I choked out, my voice thick with unshed tears, trembling.
We need to talk. Now.
There was a pause. A carefully measured pause. Clara? Is everything okay? I'm in a meeting. A meeting? With whom? Was she there? The thought sent a fresh wave of nausea through me. No, I whispered, the word a broken shard of glass. Everything is not okay. I know. Another pause. Longer this time. The calm professionalism wavered, just slightly. A tension entered his voice. You know what? I couldn't say it. Not the word affair. Not the word Jessica. I know, I repeated, my voice rising, cracking. Just come home. Please. Or I'll come there. He sighed, a sound of weary impatience. I can't just leave right now, Clara. I'll be home late. We'll talk then.
Late.
Like the late nights he'd been having. Late like the late nights he was planning for Shanghai. The casual cruelty of his dismissal, prioritizing a meeting or her, over the obvious distress in my voice, was a second betrayal layered on top of the first. It solidified the chasm that had just opened between us. Fine, I said, my voice hardening, the grief starting to morph into something colder, sharper. Then I'll come there. I hung up before he could protest. My legs felt like lead, but adrenaline propelled me. I drove to the office on autopilot, the city lights blurring into streaks of color, my mind a chaotic whirlwind of disbelief and pain. Every street corner, every building seemed to mock me with memories of our shared life, our shared ambitions, our shared commutes to this very building. I walked into Sterling Corp like a ghost. The security guard, who knew me by name, looked surprised to see me mid-afternoon, my face pale and drawn.
Inudda, asilena nouladmen I bareli registerat.
The elevator ride-up felt endless, the music a tinny, cruel soundtrack to the implosion of my life. I went straight to his office. The door was closed. I didn't knock. I pushed it open.
He was sitting at his desk.
And she was there, Jessica, sitting in the chair opposite him, leaning forward, laughing at something he'd just said. They weren't touching, weren't overtly affectionate, but the air in the room was thick with an intimacy that stole my breath. The way they looked at each other, the easy familiarity, the bubble they occupied, it was a physical manifestation of the texts I'd just read. They both froze when I opened the door. David's eyes widened in alarm, then narrowed into something unreadable. Jessica's smile vanished, replaced by a flicker of surprise, then something that looked suspiciously like smugness. Clara. David stood up quickly, knocking a pen off his desk. It clattered on the polished floor, the sound unnaturally loud in the sudden silence. What are you doing here? I ignored him, my gaze fixed on Jessica. She wasn't just a name on a phone screen anymore. She was a real person, occupying space that felt like mine, bathed in the attention of the man who was supposed to be my husband. The casual way she sat there in my world was an affront. Get out, I said, my voice low, flat, directed at her. Jessica looked at David, a silent question passing between them. He gave her a small, almost imperceptible nod. It was a dismissal, a shared understanding. He was choosing this confrontation with me over her presence. A small, cold victory? Or just clearing the decks? She stood up, gathering her things with deliberate slowness. As she walked past me, she didn't meet my eyes. But as she reached the door, she paused, just for a second. I felt her gaze on me. It wasn't apologetic. It wasn't guilty. It was appraising, like she was looking at a problem that was about to be removed. The door clicked shut behind her. Silence again. Just David and me, in his office, surrounded by the symbols of the success we built, now the backdrop for its demolition. What is this, Clara? He asked, his voice regaining some of its earlier control, but now edged with annoyance. Walking in here like this? You can't just barge into my office. Your office? I echoed, a bitter laugh escaping my lips. This office? This company? We built this, David. Together. We did, he conceded, moving around his desk. But things change. People change. Do they? I stared at him, searching for any trace of the man I loved. There was none. Or do you just hide who you really are until it's convenient to show yourself? He didn't answer the affair accusation directly. He didn't need to. His lack of denial, his evasive eyes, the ghost of Jessica's presence in the room, it was all confirmation. The Shanghai texts were just the tip of the iceberg. Then he pivoted, away from the personal, towards the professional, back to the language of the conference table. Look, Clara. This situation. It's complicated, but your job. My job? He was going to talk about my job now? In this moment, the sheer audacity took my breath away. My job. I repeated, incredulous. You're talking about my job? After, I gestured vaguely, encompassing the room. The woman who just left, the shattered pieces of my life lying between us. Yes, your job, he insisted, his voice firming up, putting on the corporate mask again. This isn't working out anymore. What isn't working out? My voice was barely a whisper. My performance? My strategy? The 15 years I've given this company. Your role, he said, his gaze steady now, cold and resolute. The company is moving in a new direction. We need fresh perspectives in key leadership roles. Agile thinking. Innovation. He used all the buzzwords. Agile. Innovation. Fresh perspectives. Was this it? Was this the real reason? Or was it just cover? Fresh perspectives? I couldn't help but ask, the dry humor he supposedly loved now laced with venom. Like Jessica's? He didn't flinch. That's when I knew. This wasn't just about an affair. This was about power. About him wanting her in my seat. Not just as his mistress, but as his professional partner. Someone new, someone beholden to him, someone without our shared history, without my independent voice. Jessica is a talented asset, he said, his tone clinical. She brings a new energy, a different approach. She's been instrumental in developing the new marketing strategy. The marketing strategy one had signed off on after weeks of working with the team? The one based on the market research my department had provided? He was giving her credit for my work. The insult was breathtaking. So, I said, my voice dangerously quiet, you're firing me to give my job to your mistress. He finally flinched. The word, stark and ugly, hung in the air. It's not that simple, Clara. Oh, I think it's exactly that simple, David. I took a step towards his desk. You're clearing the decks. For her. And you're using restructuring as cover. You're firing the woman who built this company with you, who stood by you, who trusted you completely. And for what? A quick fix? A new toy? His face hardened. The last vestiges of anything resembling remorse vanished. You're being emotional. This is a business decision. A business decision, I repeated, the phrase tasting like ash. Based on a personal agenda. You're letting your personal life destroy your professional judgment. And our professional legacy. Our legacy is fine, he snapped. I'm taking the company forward. You're just not part of that future. He walked back to his chair, sat down, picked up the pen that had fallen. He was done. The conversation was over. So that's it. My world was crashing down, and he was picking up a pen. 15 years. Our marriage. My career. All dismissed in a 5-minute conversation about restructuring? Your severance package is generous, he said, looking at his computer screen now. HR will be in touch. You'll need to pack your personal effects by end of day tomorrow. Security will escort you. Escort me? From the company I helped build? By security? The humiliation was absolute. It wasn't enough to fire me. He had to make it a public spectacle, a definitive severing.
No quiet departure.
A banishment. I stood there for a long moment, the air thick with unspoken rage, with the echo of shattered trust. I looked at him, this stranger who wore my husband's face, sitting in the office we shared, planning a future with her. And in that moment, something inside me snapped. Not in a way that broke me further, but in a way that coiled, tightened, preparing to strike. The pain was still there, raw and debilitating, but beneath it, a spark ignited. A cold, hard refusal to be discarded. I didn't say another word. I turned and walked out of his office, out of the company, out of the life I thought was mine. The automatic doors hissed open, and I stepped out into the bright, indifferent sunlight of the city street, unemployed, betrayed, and utterly alone. The fight had just begun, though I didn't know it then. All I knew was the burning humiliation and the chilling realization that the man I loved had become my executioner. The first few weeks were a blur of pain and disbelief. Losing David was one thing, a seismic emotional shock. But losing my job, my professional identity, the career I had built for 15 years at the same moment? It was a double amputation. I wandered through my days in a haze, the apartment that used to be ours now just a stark reminder of his absence and my sudden, terrifying lack of purpose. Everywhere I looked, I saw ghosts of our life together. His side of the closet empty. The worn armchair where he used to read. The coffee mug with his favorite sports team logo. It wasn't just the emotional wreckage, it was the constant, physical presence of his goneness. And intertwined with that was the stark reality of my unemployment. I hadn't just lost a job, I'd been publicly removed from a high-profile position in an industry where reputations were everything. The whispers started immediately. What happened to Clara? Why was she fired so suddenly? The official line was restructuring. But in our world, sudden high-level departures always meant something more. And with David still there, and Jessica now occupying a suspiciously similar role, the rumors quickly zeroed in on the truth, albeit a distorted version. My professional network, built over years, suddenly felt distant, awkward. Phone calls weren't returned as quickly. Emails went unanswered. People didn't want to be associated with the woman who had been spectacularly fired by her own husband, possibly because of an affair. The shame was suffocating. Financially, I was afloat for a little while on savings and the severance package David had so clinically mentioned. But the package, while generous by some standards, was a pittance compared to my long-term earnings potential and the life we had built. It was designed to be just enough to keep me from being immediately destitute, but not enough to thrive or take my time finding the right next step. It was a calculated move to keep me quiet, to make me scramble. I tried applying for jobs. I updated my resume, polished my LinkedIn profile, but sending out applications felt like shouting into a void. Cover letters felt hollow. How do you explain being fired by your husband? How do you spend 15 years at one company ending so abruptly under such circumstances? Every interview felt like an interrogation, the unspoken question hanging in the air. What really happened? My confidence, so solid for years, crumbled under the weight of rejection and silent judgment.
I saw them sometimes.
In tabloids, online, in social media feeds that friends hadn't filtered carefully enough. David and Jessica. At company events, smiling, looking every bit the successful power couple we used to be. Seeing her in my role, standing by my husband's side, was a fresh wound every time. It wasn't just professional replacement, it was personal erasure. She wasn't just in my office. She was in my life, wearing my shoes, sitting at my table. One particularly dark afternoon, huddled on the sofa in an apartment that felt too big, too empty, I saw an article online about Sterling Corp's new strategic direction. The headline touted bold changes, a dynamic new vision, spearheaded by David and his integral partner, Jessica. The article detailed initiatives that sounded suspiciously like ideas I had been developing, plans we had discussed years ago, now repackaged and presented as theirs. It was like watching them take credit for building a house I had designed and laid the foundation for. The casual theft of my professional legacy, combined with the public display of their partnership, sent me into a spiral. I felt utterly powerless. They had taken everything, my husband, my job, my reputation, even my ideas. I was adrift, a ghost in the city I had helped shape, watching the company I loved being steered into a future I wasn't part of by the people who had exiled me. Despair was a physical weight, pressing down on my chest, making it hard to breathe, hard to see a way out. It seemed they had won.
Completely.
And I had lost. Utterly. Days bled into weeks. Weeks into months. The severance dwindled. The job search yielded nothing but polite rejections or, worse, silence. The apartment became a prison of my own making. I barely left. The thought of facing anyone, of seeing pity or judgment in their eyes, was unbearable. I felt like a cautionary tale, the woman who lost everything. The despair deepened, settling into a cold, heavy numbness.
I stopped looking at job sites.
I stopped answering calls from friends who tried to reach out. The energy required to pretend I was okay was too much. I was failing. At life, at coping, at simply existing. One evening, staring out the window at the city lights, the same lights I used to look at with David, dreaming of our future, a chilling thought occurred to me. What if they were right? What if I was redundant? What if I couldn't come back from this? The thought was terrifying, a cold hand squeezing my heart. Was this it? Was this the end of my story? Then another thought, sharp and unwelcome. David was right. I was being emotional, wallowing in self-pity, allowing myself to be consumed by grief and despair. Was this how I wanted my story to end? As a victim? As the woman he discarded, who faded away? A flicker of something stirred within the numbness. It wasn't hope, not yet. It was anger, a hot, bitter, cleansing anger. Anger at David for his betrayal. Anger at Jessica for her opportunistic assent. Anger at myself for being so blind, so trusting, so utterly unprepared for their cruelty. I had given 15 years to Sterling Corporation. Not just hours, but my intelligence, my passion, my strategic mind. I had helped build that company. I knew its strengths, its weaknesses, its potential. And watching David and Jessica from the outside, taking the reins, pretending they were charting a new, brilliant course. Something felt wrong. I remembered the article I'd read, the one about their dynamic new vision. I pulled it up again. I started reading more carefully this time, not through the haze of personal pain, but with the critical eye of a strategist. Their plan involved aggressive expansion into a volatile new market, funded by taking on significant debt. It sounded bold, yes, but also reckless. Dangerously so. It went against everything I knew about Sterling's core strengths, its risk tolerance, its financial health. I started looking for more information. Public financial reports, industry news, analyst briefings. Anything I could access as a former employee with ingrained knowledge of where to look and what to look for. Slowly, painstakingly, a picture began to emerge. A picture of hasty decisions, inflated projections, and a worrying disregard for potential pitfalls. They weren't just taking credit for my ideas. They were distorting them, pushing them to extremes I would never have endorsed. The aggressive expansion was draining resources. The new market wasn't yielding the promised returns. Whispers from sympathetic former colleagues confirmed my fears. Morale was low, internal dissent was growing, key talent was leaving. David and Jessica were flying high on the appearance of success, but the foundation was cracking. Their agile thinking was simply cutting corners. Their innovation was blind risk-taking. And I, the woman they had deemed redundant, the woman with the old perspective, could see it all. A cold clarity washed over me. This wasn't just about revenge. This wasn't just about getting my job back. This was about the company I had helped build being steered towards disaster by incompetence and arrogance. And I had the knowledge, the insight, and increasingly, the evidence to prove it.
But how?
I was outside the gates, stripped of my title, my access, my influence. They were inside, holding all the power. It felt insurmountable. The anger gave way to a frustrating helplessness again. I had the diagnosis, but no way to administer the cure. Then a memory surfaced. A small, almost forgotten detail from years ago. When Sterling Corp first went public, key employees were offered stock options as part of their compensation package. David and I had received significant grants. We discussed them, planned to hold on to them for long-term growth. Over the years, those options had converted into shares. David handled most of our joint finances, the investments, the portfolios. I assumed our shares were pooled, managed together. But I remembered a specific conversation early on about separating some of my compensation into a personal, independent account, a safety net, just in case, we joked. It was a small amount at the time, almost negligible compared to our joint holdings. Had I actually gone through with it? Had I kept it separate? I dug through old digital files, dusty paper records from years ago, tax documents, old compensation statements, brokerage account confirmations. For days, I sifted through the detritus of our shared financial life, searching for that one specific thread. And then I found it. A statement from a brokerage account in my name only, opened years ago, funded by a specific allocation of stock options from an early grant. It wasn't a massive stake, not compared to David's holdings or the major institutional investors. But it was mine, untouched, largely forgotten, slowly growing over the years. It represented a small but significant minority shareholding in Sterling Corporation. It wasn't enough to control the company, not by a long shot, but it was enough to have a voice, enough to attend shareholder meetings, enough, perhaps, to demand certain information, enough to make me more than just a disgruntled former employee. It made me an owner, a shareholder, with rights. The helplessness began to recede, replaced by a quiet, focused determination. I had a stake. I had knowledge of their failures. I had evidence of their mismanagement, pieced together from public records and leaked whispers. The pieces were starting to fall into place. This wasn't just about getting even. It was about reclaiming my narrative. It was about proving that I wasn't redundant, that my vision for the company was the right one, that their reckless grab for power was destroying what I helped create. And it was about showing David and Jessica and everyone who had doubted me that I wasn't gone. I was just waiting, watching, planning. The deepening crisis wasn't just about the company's performance. It was about my own dwindling resources and the ticking clock. My severance was running out. The small shareholding was leverage, not liquid cash for daily expenses. I needed a strategy, and I needed it fast. Every passing day, David and Jessica tightened their grip, their questionable decisions potentially doing irreparable damage not only to the company, but also to the value of my own shares. Their recklessness was costing me money, adding insult to injury. I watched as they announced increasingly elaborate, increasingly desperate initiatives. A splashy, expensive marketing campaign that seemed tone-deaf to the current market. An acquisition of a small, struggling competitor at an inflated price, explained away as synergy. Every announcement felt like a nail in the coffin of the stable, successful company I had known. The financial reports confirmed my fears. Revenue targets were being missed, costs were spiraling, and debt was piling up. They were burning through capital, betting big, and losing bigger. Accessing information became harder. Sympathetic colleagues grew more cautious, afraid of losing their own jobs. David had implemented stricter controls, sensing perhaps that information leaks were tied to me. He likely assumed I was just being vengeful, digging for dirt about the affair. He completely underestimated my focus, my ability to separate the personal pain from the professional rot. He couldn't comprehend that I cared more about the integrity and future of Sterling Corp than I did about his personal life. The threat felt more palpable now. It wasn't just abstract financial decline. It was the potential collapse of the company, taking my reputation and my last remaining asset, the shares, with it. I was the architect of strategies designed for sustainable growth, risk mitigation. They were acting like gamblers at a high-stakes table, and the house was about to clean them out. I needed help. My small shareholding gave me a right to information, but enforcing those rights, navigating the complex world of corporate governance, shareholder activism, and potentially legal challenges, that required expertise I didn't have. I reached out to a lawyer recommended by a distant contact, someone outside my immediate professional sphere, known for handling complex corporate disputes and shareholder rights. His name was Elias Thorne. He had a reputation for being quiet, meticulous, and utterly relentless when he took a case. He was also incredibly expensive. Meeting Elias was a turning point in itself. His office was minimalist, overlooking the city skyline, a cold, calm space that mirrored his demeanor. I laid out my story, the years building the company, the marriage, the sudden firing, the affair, David's ascent with Jessica, the evidence of their mismanagement, my forgotten shares. I expected skepticism, pity, perhaps a suggestion to just take my severance and move on. Instead, Elias listened intently, his gaze steady, occasionally asking a sharp, precise question that cut straight to the heart of the corporate issue, not the personal drama. He wasn't interested in the affair as a personal injury case. He was interested in the firing as a potentially wrongful dismissal, the husband's actions as a breach of fiduciary duty if he was prioritizing a personal relationship over the company's best interests, and Jessica's promotion and subsequent actions as potential corporate malfeasance if they were incompetent or reckless. He saw the potential, not for a simple lawsuit but for something bigger. He saw the power of my unique position, a former high-level executive with deep institutional knowledge, a shareholder, and a victim of clear professional and personal betrayal. The combination was potent. "Mr. Thorne," I said, my voice trembling slightly despite my resolve. "I don't just want justice. I want to fix what they're breaking. I want to protect the company I helped build." He leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. "Miss Clara," he said, his voice calm and measured, "justice is often a byproduct of leverage. You have a small piece of ownership, deep insight into their failures, and a compelling narrative. They have control, arrogance, and a growing list of liabilities." He explained the path forward. It wouldn't be easy. It would be expensive. It would be a fight. We could leverage my shareholding to demand access to more detailed financial records. We could build a case based on breach of fiduciary duty, gross mismanagement, and potentially even corporate malfeasance, linking David's personal actions, promoting Jessica, to his professional failures, her incompetence, their joint reckless strategy. The goal wasn't just to sue David. It was to challenge his leadership, potentially rally other shareholders, and force a change at the highest level. The ultimate goal, Elias explained, based on the potential scale of their mismanagement and my deep understanding of the company's real needs, wasn't just reinstatement. It could be a complete overhaul of leadership. And given my history, my knowledge, and my newfound leverage, the possibility existed for me to step back into a leadership role, a significant one. Leaving Elias's office, the city's skyline outside no longer looked indifferent. It looked like a battlefield. A wave of fear washed over me. Could I really do this? Take on David, the man I was married to for 15 years? Challenge his authority, his competence, his entire professional standing? The man who knew all my weaknesses, all my fears? And face Jessica, who had already taken so much. But beneath the fear was that cold, hard determination. David had underestimated me. He thought firing me, cutting me off, would silence me, break me. He thought I would disappear, a casualty of his ambition and deceit. But he hadn't just fired an employee. He had created an adversary with nothing left to lose, deep knowledge of his vulnerabilities, and a growing arsenal of evidence. The turning point wasn't a single dramatic event. It was the quiet, internal shift from despair to strategic action. It was sitting across from Elias Thorne, looking at the cold, hard facts he laid out, and making a conscious decision to stop being the victim and start being the architect of my own comeback. The cost would be immense, emotional, financial, public. But the cost of doing nothing, of letting them destroy the company and my legacy, was even higher. I told Elias yes. We would build the case. We would gather the evidence. We would use every tool available to a shareholder. We would expose their mismanagement. We would challenge David's leadership. We would fight. The decision solidified something inside me. The broken pieces weren't gone, but they were being reforged into something stronger, something harder. I wasn't just fighting for myself anymore. I was fighting for Sterling Corporation. And I was fighting to prove that they had made the biggest mistake of their lives the moment they decided I was disposable. The trap was being set, quietly, meticulously, with the patience of someone who knew the terrain better than the people currently occupying it. The final act was approaching. The next few months were a blur of intense, covert work. Elias and his team were relentless. Leveraging my shareholder status, we demanded detailed financial statements, board meeting minutes, internal reports on project performance. David and his team initially dragged their feet, providing heavily redacted documents, citing confidentiality, clearly trying to stonewall us. They saw me as a nuisance, a bitter ex-wife with a lawyer. They didn't see me as a credible threat. This arrogance was their undoing. With each hurdle they put up, Elias's team became more aggressive, citing corporate law, threatening legal action for noncompliance. We used my deep understanding of Sterling's internal structure and data systems, knowledge they couldn't erase, to pinpoint exactly which documents we needed, making their excuses ring hollow. We found evidence of inflated earnings reports, hidden liabilities, questionable accounting practices used to mask the true extent of their strategic failures. Jessica's pet projects, the ones David had touted as innovative, were hemorrhaging money with no sign of return. The expensive acquisition was proving to be a burden, not a benefit. They were not just failing, they were actively misrepresenting the company's health. Meanwhile, I was working on a different front. Quietly, discreetly, I reconnected with key people within Sterling Corp who I knew were disillusioned. Loyal employees who were concerned about the company's direction, senior managers sidelined by David and Jessica, board members who were growing uneasy as the financial results didn't match the optimistic press releases. I didn't share everything, not at first. I spoke about my concerns for the company, about the direction I saw it heading, asking questions, planting seeds of doubt they were already starting to feel. I listened more than I spoke, letting them voice their frustrations, their fears. I was rebuilding my network not for a job but for support. The tension mounted. David and Jessica were aware of our inquiries, our demands for documents. Their responses became more agitated, more defensive. They started counter-rumors, portraying me as unstable, vengeful, trying to sabotage the company out of spite. They clearly underestimated the solid, factual nature of the case we were building. They thought they could dismiss me as a scorned woman. They didn't realize I was operating purely on the level of corporate governance and financial integrity. The moment arrived when Elias determined we had enough. Enough documented mismanagement, enough evidence of potential fiduciary breaches, enough concerned parties within the company and among shareholders. We had built a compelling case that David's leadership, exacerbated by the promotion and influence of an unqualified individual, Jessica, and driven by reckless decisions, was actively endangering Sterling Corp's future and shareholder value. The plan was set. We would formally requisition a special shareholder meeting. My small stake, combined with the support we had quietly garnered from other minority shareholders Elias contacted, was enough to trigger this right under corporate bylaws. The purpose of the meeting: to review the current leadership's performance and propose a vote of no confidence, potentially leading to a change in the board of directors and executive leadership. This was it. The confrontation I had been building towards. It wouldn't be a screaming match about betrayal and affairs. It would be a cold, hard, professional challenge, played out on the stage of corporate governance. It was David's world, the one he thought he controlled absolutely, turned against him. Serving the formal requisition papers was the equivalent of firing the first shot. Elias handled it with dispassionate efficiency. The reaction from David's side was immediate and furious. Legal threats flew back and forth. Attempts were made to discredit me publicly, to frame the special meeting as a frivolous, emotionally driven stunt. But Elias was ready for all of it. We stuck to the facts, the financial data, the documented decisions. This wasn't personal, it was business. Their bad business. The date for the special meeting was set. The location: the main auditorium at Sterling Corp headquarters. The same building where I had worked for 15 years, where I had been fired, where David and Jessica now reigned. It felt fitting. The final battleground on the territory of our shared history. I spent the days leading up to the meeting in a state of heightened calm, a strange mix of nerves and absolute resolve. I reviewed the presentation Elias and I had prepared, a clear, concise dismantling of David's leadership and the financial state of the company under his and Jessica's direction. It wasn't just criticism. It included my vision for stabilizing and rebuilding Sterling Corp, a strategic plan based on my years of experience and understanding of the company's true potential. I wasn't just tearing down, I was offering a credible path forward. David underestimated me until the very end. He expected me to be emotional, to bring up the affair, to make a scene. He planned to discredit me by painting me as a bitter, unstable ex-wife. He didn't realize I had moved beyond the personal pain and was now operating on a plane of strategic logic and undeniable financial facts. He thought he had removed me from the game. He didn't realize I had just been gathering new rules and a different set of pieces. The trap was sprung. The special meeting was the arena, and I was ready to step into it. The day of the special shareholder meeting dawned clear and cold. A crisp, blue sky that felt utterly detached from the storm brewing inside the Sterling Corp headquarters. Shareholders, board members, and key executives gathered in the auditorium. The air was thick with tension, anticipation, and a palpable undercurrent of nervous energy. Everyone knew this wasn't a routine meeting. It was a reckoning. I walked in flanked by Elias Thorne and his associate. My steps were steady, my back straight. I wore a simple, professional suit, nothing flashy, projecting quiet confidence and competence. Across the room, I saw David at the head table, looking strained, flanked by Sterling's legal team and other executives loyal to him. Jessica was there too, seated slightly behind him, her usual polished facade looking a little brittle around the edges. She avoided my gaze. David met it briefly, his expression a mixture of defiance and unease. He still couldn't believe I was here, forcing this confrontation. The meeting began with formalities, a thin veneer of corporate normalcy over the simmering conflict. Then it was our turn. Elias presented the legal and financial case, laying out the documented evidence of mismanagement, the missed projections, the mounting debt, the questionable acquisitions. He spoke calmly, methodically, presenting facts and figures that painted a damning picture of Sterling Corp under David's recent leadership. The silence in the room was deafening as the numbers flashed on the screen. Red figures, declining trends, liabilities disguised as assets. Then it was my turn to speak. I walked to the podium, the same podium I had stood behind countless times presenting strategic plans to the board, plans that had driven Sterling's growth for years. Taking a deep breath, I began to speak, not about betrayal or personal pain, but about the company. I spoke about its history, its core values, its potential. I spoke about the vision David and I had once shared, and how tragically off course the company had strayed. I didn't just criticize, I diagnosed. I explained why their strategies were failing, pinpointing the flawed assumptions, the missed market signals, the disregard for long-term sustainability. I used the language of business, the language I had mastered over 15 years, the language they thought I had forgotten or was too emotional to employ. My voice was calm, measured, authoritative. I wasn't the heartbroken wife. I was the seasoned strategist, the expert they had cast aside, now pointing out the gaping holes in the ship they were sinking. I presented my own plan. A detailed, step-by-step strategy for stabilization, for correcting the course, for rebuilding trust with employees and the market. It was comprehensive, pragmatic, and rooted in a deep understanding of Sterling's operations, an understanding David and Jessica, with their focus on superficial wins, clearly lacked. As I spoke, I saw the reactions in the room, the concerned frowns on shareholders' faces, the quiet nods from some of the older board members, the growing discomfort at the head table. David shifted in his seat, whispering urgently to his lawyer. Jessica stared straight ahead, her face pale. My words were landing, not just as accusations, but as credible warnings backed by undeniable data and a clear, actionable alternative. I finished my presentation and paused, letting the weight of the information sink in. The room was silent again, but this time it was a different kind of silence, reflective, considering. Then came the floor for questions. Shareholders, both large and small, stood up, directing pointed questions at David and his team about the financial discrepancies Elias had highlighted, about the strategy one had critiqued, about the leadership's accountability. David tried to deflect, to offer rehearsed answers, to cast doubt on my motives. But his responses felt weak, defensive, lacking the substance and command he once possessed. He was struggling to defend the indefensible, exposed not just as deceitful, but as demonstrably incompetent in the role he had taken for me. Midway through the questions directed at David, one of the long-standing independent board members, a woman I respected deeply, stood up. She didn't ask a question. She made a statement. "We have heard compelling evidence today regarding the performance and strategic direction of Sterling Corp," she said, her voice clear and firm. "And we have heard a detailed, viable alternative plan presented by Ms. Clara. Given the gravity of the concerns raised and the potential risks to the company's future, I believe a change in leadership is not only warranted, but necessary for the survival and prosperity of Sterling Corporation." She then made a formal motion. "I propose a vote of no confidence in the current CEO, David Sterling, and recommend the immediate formation of a transition committee to oversee a change in executive leadership." A gasp went through the room. This was faster, more direct than even Elias had anticipated. David's eyes widened in shock. He sputtered, trying to object, but the board member, supported by another, silenced him. The room erupted into murmuring. This wasn't just about my shares. It was about the collective realization that their investments, their employees' livelihoods, the company itself, was in jeopardy under David's watch. My methodical, fact-based presentation had cut through the personal drama and exposed the core issue: incompetent leadership. Then came the twist, the moment the trap I had set truly sprung shut. As the motion for the vote of no confidence was formally seconded, the same board member spoke again. "Furthermore," she announced, looking directly at me, "I propose that Ms. Clara be appointed chairwoman of this newly formed transition committee, and pending the committee's review and recommendations, considered for a senior leadership role, given her extensive history with the company, her proven strategic abilities, and the compelling vision she presented today." Chairwoman. Not my old job back. Not head of strategy. Chairwoman of the Transition Committee, a position with oversight, control over the process, and a clear path to potentially lead the company at the highest level. The highest level he occupied. David stared at her, his face a mask of disbelief. He hadn't just lost the vote of confidence before it even happened. He had lost control of the narrative, lost control of the process, and watched the woman he fired ascend to a position of power that directly challenged his own, facilitated by the very board he thought he commanded. He had thought he was firing me down and out. Instead, he had inadvertently cleared the path for me to rise higher than I ever was with him. The votes were cast. It wasn't unanimous, but it was decisive. The vote of no confidence passed. David Sterling was removed as CEO, effective immediately. Silence fell again, a stunned, pregnant silence. David sat there, frozen, his face ashen. All the power, the arrogance, the control he had wielded just moments ago evaporated, leaving him exposed, defeated. He looked utterly blindsided. He had been so focused on consolidating his power, so sure I was a non-entity, that he hadn't seen the real threat building right under his nose, using the very rules of the game he thought he owned. Then, Jessica. As the results were announced, she didn't look at David.
She didn't look at me.
She gathered her things quickly, her face tight with a mixture of shock and something else. Calculating self-preservation, perhaps? She stood up, not waiting for anyone, and practically fled the room. She hadn't been voted out. She hadn't been fired. But she knew. Her ascent was tied entirely to David. With him gone, her position was untenable. The mistress who had taken my job, who had been promoted on the back of an affair, quietly, unceremoniously exited the stage the moment the real power shifted. She didn't fight. She ran. She quit the moment she realized her carefully constructed rise had crumbled, not under a personal attack, but under the weight of their shared professional failure, exposed by the person they thought they had defeated. The board meeting ended with stunned handshakes and murmured congratulations. I was exhausted, numb, exhilarated, and heartbroken all at once. I hadn't screamed. I hadn't cried. I had dismantled his empire with facts and figures, standing exactly where he thought I had no right to be. Walking out of the auditorium, The same automatic doors that had hissed me into exile months ago now opened to reveal the setting sun, painting the city gold. I wasn't just walking out. I was walking back in. Not through the employee entrance, not back to my old office, but towards a new reality, a new challenge, and a power I had never anticipated holding. I hadn't just survived being fired by my husband to promote his mistress. I had used the very circumstances of my downfall to become chairwoman. The silence that followed the special meeting was not empty. It was filled with the quiet hum of irreversible change. David was gone. Not just from the CEO position, but from the company entirely. The board's decision was final, the evidence of mismanagement too compelling to ignore. Jessica also vanished. She didn't formally resign that day, but she didn't return to work. Her career at Sterling Corp ended as abruptly and quietly as it had begun, a footnote in the larger story of David's downfall. Her position, the one she took from me, was quickly filled by an interim appointment. My old office remained empty for a time. I didn't move back in. As chairwoman of the transition committee, my focus was on stabilizing the company, overseeing the search for a new CEO, and implementing the initial phases of the recovery plan I had presented. My new office was larger, higher up, with a view that stretched across the city, the view David knew I loved, the one he'd planned to share in Shanghai with Jessica. It felt strange sitting there, surrounded by the symbols of corporate power, a power I'd gained through such a crucible of personal pain. There was no triumphant parade, no moment of sweet revenge where I gloated in front of David or Jessica. My victory was quiet, professional, and deeply personal. It wasn't about making them suffer, though their public humiliation and professional ruin were undeniable consequences of their actions. It was about reclaiming what was taken, about proving my worth, and about saving the company that represented so much of my life's work. The emotional closure came slowly, not in a single moment, but in the gradual process of rebuilding. Rebuilding Sterling Corp, one strategic decision at a time. Rebuilding my own life, separate from David's shadow. The pain of the betrayal still lingered, a scar on my heart, a reminder of the fragility of trust. The marriage ended formally, quietly, with lawyers handling the details. There was nothing left to say between us. He had made his choice, and the consequences were now undeniable. Lessons learned? So many. The most profound was that power isn't just given, it's taken. Or sometimes, it's found in the wreckage of your own destruction. I learned that being underestimated can be a powerful weapon. I learned that my value wasn't tied to a title or a relationship, but to my skills, my knowledge, my resilience. And I learned that the most satisfying victory isn't always loud and dramatic. Sometimes, it's quiet competence winning over arrogant incompetence. There was a bittersweet quality to it all.
I had won, yes.
I was in a position of power I had never dreamed of. Sterling Corp was on the path to recovery under the direction I was helping to shape. But the cost had been immense. My marriage was gone, shattered beyond repair. My trust in people was fundamentally altered. The woman who had been so optimistic, so trusting, was gone, replaced by someone harder, warier, but also, perhaps, stronger. Looking out at the city from my new office, I sometimes think about the journey. From the shared office with David, building dreams together, to the cold conference room where he dismantled my life, to the empty apartment, to the quiet struggle, the frantic gathering of evidence, the strategic planning, the terrifying confrontation, and finally, to this chair. It was a path I would never have chosen, paved with betrayal and loss. But it led me here, to a place where I was in control, where I was trusted, where I could use my abilities to build something new, something better. It wasn't the future I had planned. It was something else entirely. A future forged in the fire of betrayal, tempered by resilience, built on the ruins of a life I thought was certain. A future that was entirely, undeniably my own. If this story hit close to home, I'd love to hear your version. Drop a comment with where you're listening from and what time it is. Thanks for being here. Subscribing helps bring more of these to life.